Okay, let's dive right into a story that feels like it was ripped from the pages of a novel, starting with what seemed like, well, a perfect life, an apartment ready, a wedding being planned, a future mapped out with someone you thought was your partner for life.
Yeah, everything's seemingly in place.
Exactly. And then suddenly, in one devastating conversation, everything shatters. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a very personal, powerful account shared by one of our listeners, simply titled, A Betrayal Too Deep to Heal.
And what's so compelling about this particular source material, I think, is how a single firsthand narrative can offer such profound universal insights into the very foundations of relationships.
Yep.
Trust, perceived value, self-respect, and the nature of betrayal itself. It's not academic research, obviously, but it cuts right to the core of human dynamics.
Absolutely. We're going to trace this narrative from a place of apparent stability, through a moment of sudden, shocking rupture, into a quiet, almost chillingly resolute departure, and finally, arrive at a point of profound reflection.
It really does have a dramatic emotional arc.
It really does. And our mission is to unpack every turning point, look at the details that make it so vivid, and extract those core lessons about what happens when trust is fundamentally broken.
Yeah, it forces us, and you listening, to look closely at the difference between a shared future built on mutual respect and love, and one that might be implicitly conditional on external factors, like, say, family approval or perceived status.
Big difference there.
Okay.
So let's go back to the beginning of this relationship, when things, on the surface at least, seem to be progressing perfectly.
Okay. So the narrator tells us he and Nathalie had been together for 3 years. They met after college, and things moved relatively quickly, actually. They moved in together after just 1 year.
Well, okay.
Got engaged in their second year, and by the time this crucial conversation happened, they were deep into wedding planning.
He paints a picture of settled certainty, doesn't he? He says explicitly, the apartment was ready, the wedding planned, life planned. It sounds like they weren't just dating casually. They were actively building a shared future, making concrete plans.
Absolutely, laying down roots. And his description of Nathalie initially, he found her brilliant, magnificent, ambitious, everything I was looking for. That suggests a really strong foundation, of admiration and attraction.
It does. It highlights that the initial connection and the reasons he fell for her were based on qualities he genuinely valued. But the narrative also immediately introduces a significant underlying tension. They're vastly different backgrounds.
Yeah, this is key. And this difference wasn't just minor, where they grew up. It was a difference in their entire social and economic worlds.
Right. The narrator describes coming from a middle-class family in Ohio. He worked his way through a state university, relying on loans and odd jobs to get by. He's an architect, working at a firm he calls correct, implying it's reputable and solid, but maybe not prestigious. He's building a career he's proud of, doing work he loves.
A career built through his own effort and passion. Nathalie, on the other hand, is from a world of old money, attended private schools, her parents belong to golf clubs, they have a secondary residence in the mountains. You get the picture.
The very comfortable, privileged upbringing that stands in stark contrast to his. Completely different spheres.
Totally. And these contrasting worlds inevitably collided when he interacted with Nathalie's parents, Richard and Caroline. The narrator describes their consistent coolness towards him.
Not outright hostility, maybe, but...
Exactly. But a palpable sense of reserve, a subtle distance. It manifested in what he calls pointed questions about his work. These weren't just, curious inquiries. They felt designed to gauge his professional potential, his trajectory.
Measured against their specific standard, you mean?
Precisely. They had a benchmark in mind. And the comparisons were constant and deliberate. Caroline would frequently mention Nathalie's ex, specifically highlighting that he worked in finance in New York City.
Ah, the classic finance guy comparison.
Right. A field often associated with high earning potential and a certain social status, implicitly holding it up against the narrator's career in architecture.
And Richard did something similar, bringing up the sons of his friends, doctors, senior executives. It's pretty clear they had a very specific idea of the kind of man they wanted their daughter to marry.
Yeah, these anecdotes served as not-so-subtle reminders of that ideal. Now, the narrator's reaction to this at the time is really interesting. He initially rationalized it.
As you might.
Yeah.
Oh.
He told himself, okay, these are just difficult in-laws. That's a common challenge. He relied heavily on Nathalie's behavior during these encounters, her squeezing his hand under the table, her eye rolling when her parents weren't looking.
Little signals.
He interpreted these actions as signs of solidarity, believing they were in the same team, facing this external pressure together.
And looking back, he has this really poignant line. Avec le recul, j'aurais dû voir les signes. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. It makes you wonder, how often do we see things but choose to interpret them in the most favorable light because we desperately want our relationship to work?
Oh, constantly. We build narratives. He rationalized their behavior as maybe just snobbery, perhaps underestimating how deeply their opinions might influence Nathalie, or maybe her own internal conflicts about their different worlds and futures.
He probably thought their love was stronger.
He believed the strength of their relationship, their shared plans and love, was a stronger force than her parents' expectations, which of course sets the stage for this incredibly dramatic unraveling.
And it wasn't a slow burn either. It was a sudden, sharp break delivered on an ordinary Thursday in April.
Yeah, the setup is almost mundane. He describes coming home tired from a client meeting, expecting the usual routine, a chat, relaxing together, but the atmosphere was immediately off. Nathalie was at the kitchen counter, unusually silent, intensely focused on her laptop. He points out that she normally loved sharing details of her day. This silence, he says, was his first alarm signal.
Wow, just that slight change.
A small, seemingly insignificant detail, but one that immediately told him something was fundamentally wrong. It shows how tuned in he was to her usual patterns.
So he asks her about her day.
He does, and her response is delayed, hesitant, and then comes the revelation. She had lunch with her parents.
The lunch.
And the immediate focus of their conversation with her was us. She tells him they are inquiets pour nous, worried about their relationship. He describes his reaction physically freezing, the bottle halfway to my mouth.
His mind must have been racing.
Totally. Trying to understand the source of this concern. Inquiets. Comment ça? À propos du mariage. De quoi exactement?
Yeah.
He's still thinking it's an external problem affecting them.
But then she drops the first hint of the real issue, still hesitant, saying her parents think he's peut-être pas la bonne personne pour moi. Maybe not the right person for it.
And that's the shift, isn't it? It's no longer a shared problem they face together. It's the terrifying implication that he is the problem. His response here is fascinating, though. Instead of panicking, he becomes incredibly calm.
Really? Calm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He puts the beer down, unopened, and asks the single most critical question. Et toi, qu'est-ce que tu en penses? And you, what do you think?
Direct. Cuts right through it.
Yeah.
He needs her personal truth.
Exactly. But her initial answer is still a deflection, framing it around her parents.
And these doubts hit hard, I imagine, because they echo everything he's heard from her parents before.
Precisa. His career potential isn't high enough compared to finance or medicine. They won't be able to afford the lifestyle she's accustomed to. They come from worlds too different.
Issues that apparently hadn't seemed like deal breakers before.
Exactly. But now, under the weight of her parents' judgment, they suddenly become insurmountable obstacles for her as she thinks about the future. Maybe about having children, who knows?
And then comes the line that you can tell cut him the deepest. She delivers the accusation that he seems very comfortable in his current life.
Yeah, that he never talks about making partner or starting his own firm, that he seems satisfied with being average?
Wow.
Yeah.
Satisfied with being average. That's not just a critique of his income. It's a fundamental judgment of his character, his ambition, his very worth.
Absolutely brutal. He notes, ça m'a blessé, it hurt me. And you can totally understand why. He works hard, he's passionate about his projects, he's building a solid career doing what he loves. He doesn't claim to be a superstar, but average. That just dismisses his entire effort and passion.
And as she's saying this, as she's echoing her parents' judgments, there's this small, incredibly potent physical detail he describes.
The ring! She starts spinning her engagement ring around her finger.
The symbol of their commitment. The one that cost him 3 months' salary. The one her mother had condescendingly called cute.
That action at that exact moment speaks volumes. It's almost like she's physically demonstrating how loose her hold is on the relationship itself, underscores the weight of her words.
Definitely. And then she delivers the final devastating blow, directly quoting her parents, but now with the clear implication that she agrees.
Mes parents ne t'approuvent pas. Ils pensent que je peux trouver quelqu'un de mieux. My parents don't approve. They think I can find someone better.
Just, wow. Think about that. 3 years, shared life, engagement, planning a wedding, all reduced to parental approval and whether she could do better.
The narrator describes the physical feeling of hearing this. Le salon semblait tanguer doucement comme un bateau qui encaisse une vague. The solid ground beneath him just gives way.
And despite the world swaying, he asks the question again. The same calm, direct question.
Et toi, qu'est-ce que tu en penses? He gives her one last chance to state her own position, to defend their relationship, to defend him. Her inability to look him in the eyes, coupled with her quiet, devastating confirmation, seals the deal. Je crois qu'ils ont peut-être raison. I think they might be right.
That's the moment. It wasn't just her parents' disapproval. It was her agreement with it. That's the core of the betrayal.
Exactly. And this is where the narrative diverges from the typical movie script, right? As the narrator notes, the expected reaction would be begging, tears, maybe yelling, an emotional breakdown.
But instead,
he experiences something else entirely. A clarté glaciale, an icy clarity.
Icy clarity. That's a fascinating description.
Isn't it? Not screaming, not crying, just this.
Yeah.
Glacial clarity that washes over him. It's the calm that comes after the storm hits, the moment of absolute certainty born from utter devastation. The emotional turmoil is overwhelming, but the decision becomes crystal clear.
And from this icy clarity flows a simple, final response. No arguing, no pleading.
None of that. He just says, alors, fais-le, then do it. And clarifies, trouve quelqu'un de mieux. Si c'est vraiment ce que toi et tes parents pensaient, find someone better, if that's really what you and your parents think.
He accepts her choice, accepts her agreement with their assessment, and basically tells her to act on it.
Yeah, he releases her. And Nathalie's reaction highlights how unexpected this calm, definitive response was. She's surprised, clearly expecting a fight, tears, a dramatic scene. She tries to backtrack.
Suddenly it's complicated again.
Right. She says it's more complicated, she just has doubts. But his icy clarity doesn't allow for that complexity anymore. He sees the core issue, simply.
Des doutes sur le fait que je sois assez bien pour toi, parce que tes parents le pensent. Doubts that I'm good enough for you because your parents think so.
He calls it out directly.
And when she insists it's complicated, he counters with chilling simplicity. Because for me, it seems rather simple.
Wow. The conversation is over, the decision is made. He walks past her into the bedroom. And there's another telling detail: he takes a long shower. It feels like more than just getting clean, doesn't it? It's like a physical act of washing away the relationship, using that time to process and finalize his plan. He explicitly says that by the time he got out, his plan was already ready.
The icy clarity had translated into concrete, immediate action.
And the dramatic irony just ramps up here. He comes out, and Nathalie is in bed, looking at her phone, completely oblivious to the finality of his decision, acting as if it were a normal night. She suggests they talk tomorrow, when they're both less tired and can think calmly. And he agrees calmly. Bien sûr. Demain, of course. Tomorrow.
Playing along, knowing full well that tomorrow will be a completely different reality than she anticipates. This is where that quiet resolve just solidifies.
And the execution of his plan is described with incredible precision, almost clinical. He waits until her breathing is deep, around midnight, to confirm she's asleep. Then, silently, he puts the plan into motion.
Starting with?
The pre-packed sports bag he'd already prepared.
Whoa, wait, pre-packed. That suggests maybe. Maybe on some level he saw this coming, or was at least prepared for a sudden exit.
It certainly implies a level of preparedness, doesn't it? His first action online is significant. Accessing the resident portal and initiating the transfer of the lease from his name to hers.
Even then it needs signatures.
Right, but it's a clear statement of intent. This is her apartment now and her responsibility. He even notes that the building manager, Monsieur Peterson, was reasonable and would likely help her, showing this strange mix of calculation and maybe even a shred of consideration in his departure.
It's not pure chaos, it's a deliberate disengagement.
Exactly. Then the financial separation. Accessing his bank account, removing her as an authorized user on their shared credit card, and ordering a new one for himself.
The card they use for shared stuff, like groceries.
He clarifies their finances were mostly separate, but cutting off access immediately forces her to confront the immediate practical reality of her new situation. No buffer.
He is dismantling the shared life piece by piece.
Meticulously. He also lists all the services and subscriptions in his name: electricity, internet, streaming, everything that connects him to that shared life and would need to be transferred or canceled.
It's a systematic untangling.
It really is. And finally, the note. Brief, unemotional. explains his departure, confirms the initiated lease transfer, says he'll return later for his things.
And he even gives her a month's grace on the bills.
Yeah, he offers to cover the services for a month to ease her transition. It's a fascinating detail. Is it control? A final gesture? Either way, it still places the ultimate responsibility squarely on her.
And he leaves the note and his key on the kitchen counter.
Symbolic actions marking the end. His physical and emotional presence is gone. And then he simply leaves the apartment, silently, into the night.
And that quiet departure leads him immediately to the kind of loyalty he had just been shown was conditional. He'd called his friend Mark earlier while Nathalie was in the shower.
Right, and Mark's reaction is highlighted as the complete opposite of Nathalie's. Mark agreed to let him crash without asking questions. That immediate, unconditional support is such a powerful counterpoint.
It really is. Arriving at Mark's place at 1 a.m., he's met with warmth and genuine concern. Mark, half asleep, just asks, "Ça va, mec? You okay, man?"
Simple, direct concern. He tells Mark everything, and Mark's response isn't to try and fix it or minimize it. It's blunt and validating. C'est son problème, pas le tien. It's her problem, not yours.
Placing the blame where it belongs.
Exactly. And offers unconditional refuge. Reste ici aussi longtemps que tu veux. Stay as long as you need. This moment with Mark just underscores that stark contrast between loyalty freely given and trust that proves conditional.
So the next morning, the fallout begins.
Oh yeah, the full weight of the narrator's actions hits Nathalie. His phone, which he'd kept silent, explodes with notifications, calls, texts, voicemails. The tone shifts rapidly from confusion to outright panic.
You can practically hear it escalating.
You really can through the quotes he provides. Tu es où? Rappelle-moi maintenant. Where are you? Call me now. Becomes, Je ne crois pas que tu aies juste disparu comme ça. I don't believe you just disappeared like that.
The initial shock gives way to disbelief. And then the practical realities bite hard.
Bingo! Le proprio m'a appelé à propos d'un transfert de bail. Je ne peux pas me permettre solier toute seule avec mon salaire. The landlord called about a lease transfer. I can't afford that rent alone on my salary. The consequence of that lease transfer lands.
And then the credit card.
Yeah, the message that seems to strike the narrator with particular irony. Tu as annulé l'acte. Comment tu veux que je fasse les courses maintenant? You canceled the card. How am I supposed to grocery shop now?
And this is where the reality of her supposed financial independence kind of unravels, right?
Completely. As the narrator explains, she had a modest junior editor's salary, but her parents covered her student loans, her car payments, and maintained a substantial emergency fund she rarely needed. Her independence was heavily subsidized.
A safety net she probably took for granted.
Absolutely. Now, faced with the full cost of living in their shared apartment alone, and without access even to the card for groceries, she's utterly unprepared for the practical realities. The forced independence he imposed exposed how reliant she was.
Meanwhile, while Nathalie was spiraling, the narrator was completely focused. He didn't reply to a single message.
Nope. Called his boss, took personal leave for the week. His entire energy was channeled into one thing: finding a new apartment. This is that quiet resolve in action. He's not engaging with the emotional drama. He's systematically rebuilding his own life.
Severing ties, establishing a new foundation.
Exactly. He finds a new place, smaller but nice, across town. Higher rent, but manageable, thanks to recent project bonuses he'd earned. He spends the week on Mark's couch, buying essentials, updating his address, establishing his new reality step by step.
And the actual move.
Handled with the same calculated efficiency. Since he still had legal access and a spare key, he arranged for movers to get his belongings while Nathalie was at work.
Mark was there to supervise.
Yeah, using the spare key, ensuring only the agreed-upon items were taken. He had already had essentials delivered to Mark, so the transition into his new place the following week was smooth. A complete, controlled disengagement.
Leaving Nathalie to deal with the mess. And her messages kept coming.
They did, and the tone shifts again, moving from panic and anger to regret and pleading. Messages like, S'il te plaît, parle-moi, on peut arranger ça. Please, talk to me, we can fix this.
And trying to backtrack.
Oh, yeah. Je ne voulais pas dire ce que j'ai dit. C'était le stress des préparatifs du mariage. Mes parents avaient tort, je le sais maintenant. I didn't mean what I said, it was wedding stress. My parents were wrong, I know now. Trying to undo the damage, framing it as a temporary lapse.
Minimizing her own role in it.
Exactly. But after 5 days of silence and rebuilding, the narrator sends a single, direct message. Purely logistical.
No emotion.
None. just states his intention to get his remaining items, confirms the bills are paid for the month, asks for a time when she won't be home.
And her reply?
Immediate, desperate, emotional, "S'il te plaît, ne fais pas ça, je t'aime, please don't do this, I love you." But for him, it's over. His internal thought is simply, "Trupped hard." Too late, the window slams shut.
Then, day 6, something completely unexpected happens. A call from Richard, Nathalie's father.
Yeah, and the narrator notes the drastic change in Richard's tone. Very different from usual, less arrogant, almost humble. The narrator's initial instinct is resistance. Nothing to talk about.
But Richard persists.
He does, appealing to his concern for Nathalie, saying she's not well. The narrator's response is ice cold. Dommage, mais ce n'est plus mon problème.
Too bad, but that's no longer my problem.
Ouch. Direct.
Richard then offers a reluctant admission.
J'ai peut-être exagéré, dit des choses que je n'aurais pas dû.
I may have exaggerated, said things I shouldn't have.
To which the narrator delivers that beautifully understated, pointed retort. Tu crois? You think? Perfect.
Isn't it? Richard then requests an in-person meeting with his wife, Caroline, and the narrator, against his better judgment, agrees. He tells himself it's just out of curiosity.
Maybe wanting some validation, or just to see what the shift was about.
Perhaps, but the meeting turns out to be an ambush. When he arrives at the cafe, it's not just Richard and Caroline.
Uh-oh. Nathalie is there, looking visibly distraught, and even her younger brother. His immediate reaction is blunt. What is this?
Yeah, I'd feel set up too.
They urge him to sit down. Caroline looks tense, and Nathalie, usually impeccably groomed, looks like a mess, red, swollen eyes, completely lost. A stark image.
So Richard starts with an apology.
An uncomfortable, stilted apology, admitting his words were unfair and hasty, and then he reveals the real motivation for their sudden change of heart.
Cette semaine nous a montré que tu étais bien meilleur pour Nathalie qu'on ne l'avait imaginé. This past week of Nathalie's despair has made them reevaluate him.
Based on her reaction, not on his actual work.
Exactly. Caroline elaborates, describing Nathalie's devastation, not eating, not sleeping. She really loves you. Again, framing it around Nathalie's suffering as the reason for their change.
And then the truth comes out about his career.
Yes, thanks to Nathalie's brother. Richard sheepishly admits that Nathalie hadn't told us everything about your career. The brother, apparently an architecture geek, had Googled the narrator's name and found out he wasn't so average after all.
Not even close. They discovered his significant professional achievements, his work on the huge Westbrook Tower, and his listing as the principal designer for the gigantic new Riverside project. Their dismissive assessment was based on incomplete or perhaps deliberately minimized information.
And the narrator's response to this big reveal.
Classic understatement. Je m'en sors bien au bureau. I'm doing well at the office. When Caroline asks why he never mentioned it more, his explanation hits the core of his values.
What does he say?
Parce que ça ne devrait pas avoir d'importance. Je suis architecte parce que j'aime le design, pas pour impressionner les parents de ma fiancée. Because it shouldn't matter. I'm an architect because I love design, not to impress my fiancée's parents.
Boom. His worth wasn't tied to their approval.
Exactly. Richard then makes a fuller admission. On s'est trompé sur toi. Et on a eu tort de semer le doute dans l'esprit de Nathalie. We were wrong about you, and we were wrong to sow doubt in Nathalie's mind.
But the narrator isn't about to let Nathalie off the hook that easily.
Not at all. His counterpoint is sharp and directed right at her agency in this.
Vous n'avez rien semé qu'elle n'avait pas déjà laissé entrer. C'est une adulte. Elle a fait un choix. You didn't sow anything she hadn't already let in. She's an adult, but she made a choice.
He holds her accountable. While they planted the seed, she let it grow.
Precisely. Which brings us to the climax where Nathalie finally speaks, her voice trembling. She admits she made the wrong choice, that she was idiot, insecure, influenced, regrets every second. She tries to reach across the table, telling him she loves him, not for what you do or earn.
Trying to redefine her love, separate it from the status stuff.
Exactly. But the narrator refuses to take her hand. His response is quiet, but devastatingly honest.
What does he say?
Mais tu ne m'as pas défendu. Quand ils ont dit que je ne valais pas assez, tu as acquiescé. But you didn't defend me? When they said I wasn't worth enough, you agreed.
That's the core wound, isn't it? It wasn't just that her parents didn't value him, it was that she didn't defend his value to them, and worse, she agreed. That's the betrayal. Nathalie offers excuses lost, stressed by the wedding, scared. Excuses that might hold some truth, but...
But the narrator brings it back to the immediate, undeniable reality she's facing now.
Et maintenant, tu as peur de payer le loyer toute seule. And now you're afraid of paying rent alone. That cuts right through the emotional pleas and points to the tangible consequence driving her sudden change of heart.
She says that's not fair.
To which he replies with that killer question, isn't it? Tu n'es revenu que quand tu as vu que j'avais transféré le bail et annulé la carte. Isn't it? You only came back when you saw I had transferred the lease and canceled the card. He connects her return directly to the moment she lost her safety net.
Wow, no pulling punches.
She makes one last attempt, arguing that the practical problems her sudden dependence made her realize how much she needs him. But this is the final, unbreachable boundary for the narrator.
What does he say?
Je ne veux pas être nécessaire, he declares. Je veux être un choix. I don't want to be necessary, I want to be a choice. This is the principle. He didn't want to be needed out of practical necessity, but chosen freely, valued unconditionally.
That's powerful.
As he stands up, his final declaration to her is stark. Et toi, tu as choisi l'approbation de tes parents à ma place. And you chose your parents' approval over me.
Caroline makes one last plea for forgiveness.
Yeah, appealing to the idea that people make mistakes, doesn't that deserve forgiveness? But the narrator looks at them. The family who judged him caused this, and are now asking for forgiveness only when faced with the consequences and feels nothing. The icy clarity remains.
So he just leaves.
He offers a polite final farewell to the whole family. Je vous souhaite tout le bonheur du monde. I wish you all the happiness in the world. And turns to leave.
But Nathalie isn't finished yet.
Not quite. In a desperate public display, she stands up, calls out his name, drawing attention. She makes this drastic, almost unbelievable offer.
What is it?
She'll move into his new, smaller apartment. She'll pay for everything herself. She'll even cut ties with her parents, if that's what you want.
Whoa, that's extreme. It underscores her panic.
Totally. Her sudden willingness to sacrifice everything she previously seemed to value lifestyle family just to get him back now that she's facing upheaval. And the parents' reaction is key.
What do?
He describes them exchanging an alarmed look. And this look, he says, told me everything I needed to know about the sincerity of their change of attitude. Their concern wasn't about his worth or Nathalie's happiness. It was about losing control, maybe about her financial situation.
So the narrator sees right through it.
Completely. He delivers his final explanation, cutting through her desperate offer.
Ce n'est pas de ça qu'il s'agit. Ce n'est pas une question d'appartement, d'argent ou de tes parents.
It's not about that. It's not about the apartment, money, or your parents.
He brings it back to the core issue.
The fundamental break. Il s'agit du fait que tu m'as montré qui tu es vraiment. Quelqu'un qui valorise le statut et l'opinion des autres plus que la loyauté et l'amour. It's about the fact that you showed me who you really are. Someone who values status and others' opinion more than loyalty and love.
That, for him, is the irreparable damage, the revelation of her true priorities.
Her final unheard claim as he walks away is, now I believe in you. But as he knows, and as the story painfully shows, that belief was needed when it mattered, not now.
So fast forward, where's the narrator 6 months later?
He recounts his current reality. No contact with Nathalie, although occasional messages from her still arrive unanswered. The expensive bottle of whiskey her parents sent.
What happened with that?
He gave it to Mark for his birthday. Mark apparently loved it, which feels like a perfect symbolic dismissal of their attempt at reconciliation through gifts.
Nice touch. And professionally.
Flourishing. Entirely independent of her parents' validation. The Riverside project he designed was inaugurated, got great reviews, leading to a promotion to junior partner and a significant salary increase. His success materialized on his own terms.
The very success they doubted.
Exactly. And perhaps one of the most powerful symbols of his rebuilding, he bought his own apartment in the same building where Mark lives. He describes it simply. Small, but mine.
A physical manifestation of his independence, stability, built by himself.
Totally. Built on his own terms, not reliant on anyone else's wealth, status, or approval. He acknowledges that sometimes moments of doubt still surface.
Like, was I too hard?
Exactly. Was I too uncompromising? After such a definitive break, that's natural. But then the memory of that pivotal moment returns, and the clarity comes back. He reiterates the core of the betrayal, the ease with which she wavered, the speed with which she accepted her parents' judgment of my worth.
And that leads him to his powerful, painful conclusion.
Certaines trahisons sont trop profondes pour guérir. Some betrayals are too deep to heal. It's not just about the mistake, it's about what that mistake revealed about her fundamental character. Some ruptures are irreparable.
The key lesson he takes from this incredibly painful experience seems crystal clear.
Absolutely hard one. The right person doesn't need to be convinced that you are sufficient. They know it, and they defend it against anyone, even against their own family.
True loyalty isn't conditional. It's inherent, known, and defended.
Exactly. The narrator ends by saying he's still searching for that person, but now, because of this, he knows who I am looking for. And, perhaps even more importantly, he knows with absolute certainty what I am no longer willing to accept.
This deep dive into betrayal has given him a clear understanding of his own value and his non-negotiables.
To sum up this deep dive into such a personal story, the painful clarity that emerges when you discover someone you loved values external approval or status more than loyalty can be devastating. But this narrative also shows the quiet strength in recognizing that truth, walking away with conviction, and building your own foundation.
Yeah, building it based on your own terms and values. It powerfully reinforces the idea that true value isn't something you have to prove. The right person sees it and stands by it, no matter the pressure.
Which leaves us with a thought to carry with us from this story, something for you listening to consider. How do we truly know if someone's doubts are genuine questions of compatibility, maybe involving practical realities, versus doubts that stem from allowing external opinions, especially those tied to status or family expectations, to define their partner's worth?
And crucially, when does allowing those external opinions to sway their commitment cross the line into a betrayal so deep it simply cannot be healed?